Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Executive Code Podcast. As always, you can follow our podcast on all the podcast platforms, or you can watch us on YouTube, where we're actually doing a video podcast. So if you want to get the audio on the podcast platforms, or you want to watch us on YouTube, by all means, you can join us over there, and make sure you subscribe to all the channels, because that way then you'll get each of the episodes downloaded automatically. As you know, Nicole is here with me. She's asking all the questions you guys want to get answered, and she's able to dig deeper into my brain to find out what is that I'm doing, or what's the advice that I give to my clients. So by all means, look at whatever questions you have. If you want to join us in our community, share the questions that you want to get asked within the actual community itself. If you want to be a guest on the show, by all means, you can be the guest, and you can ask me directly the questions that you want to get asked. The best way of doing that is just go to our website, go to the podcast page, and you'll see the way of how you can actually become a guest on the actual show itself. All the links are in the show notes, guys. But I'm going to hand it over to Nicole. Nicole, what is the question that you want to go through today?
Thanks, Paul. So as you know, I'm really new to this, the Executive Code community. And as I was listening to one of your podcasts on Spotify, I noticed that you have, as one of the links on every episode, a graphical representation of the Executive Code called the Genius Pendulum. Yeah. And when I opened up that link, it looked like just a regular pendulum with extra rings on the body. So what exactly is the Genius Pendulum, and how did you come up with it?
Okay. So it may look, actually, I'm glad you said it, because it may look actually very, very simple, but it is actually hugely complex when you drill down into it. And the more, which is the information that I share within the community, but the more you actually drill into it, you actually realize there is a genius behind it, but it encapsulates so much in how you want to achieve personal mastery. And that's how powerful the actual Genius Pendulum is. So it may look simple, but it's actually very, very complex, because it encompasses a huge amount of things. And what you want to look at, so for people that don't know what it looks like right now at the moment, as you said, the links are in the show notes. So you can click on the link, it'll bring you to the actual GIF file itself, and be able to see the actual pendulum. But just for people to understand it conceptually, what it looks like is that you've got the circle at the very top, and that represents your executive center. So the executive center is part of your brain. It's in the prefrontal cortex. It is responsible for objectivity, planning. Its function, literally look at it from this way, is to help you to get from A to Z as quickly and as easily as possible, the fastest time frame, using the least amount of resources. That's what its function is. But the vast majority of people aren't actually operating from the executive center part of the brain. They're working from what people would refer to as the monkey part of the brain. So if you look at the graphical representation of the pendulum, what you'll see the circle, and that's the executive center. The next circle that you'll see below that then is what I refer to as your unconscious. Now, your unconscious, if you think of your mind, only processes a tiny amount of information per second. We covered this on one of the previous episodes. The unconscious, however, processes 11 million bits of information per second through all your different senses. So if your unconscious is able to process that amount of information through all your different senses, it would make sense, excuse the pun, it would make sense to be working with your unconscious. And then the next thing after your unconscious is what I call the superconscious. Now, the superconscious, which is the third circle that you'll see on the actual Genius Pendulum, and that's how it's represented. But the superconscious, people would refer to as higher power, higher mind, God, all-knowing, universe. They're all different terminologies, but the closest of what you could look at it from is the superconscious, and that's the terminology that I use within the Executive Code community and on this particular podcast. So that's what the three circles are. But what you want to achieve in life is your purpose. That's what you want to achieve. And that's centered in the first top circle, which is the executive center. And in order to achieve your purpose, there's a number of different elements that are involved in actually working towards your purpose. But just I want you to understand that's what you primarily want to achieve. A lot of people, and think of it, and the best way, I've looked at a lot of different things over the years in terms of, I use a lot of metaphors and stories of trying to explain to my clients for them to understand the concept as quickly and as easily as possible. And the pendulum is probably the best metaphor that I've come across that actually describes and conveys everything that the universe wants to convey. So what do I mean by that? When somebody is out of equilibrium, if you can visualize the pendulum, it's now out of, it's not straight down. It's either to the left or to the right. In the universe, there's always both sides. So you'll have hot, you'll have cold, you'll have good, you'll have bad, you'll have positive, you'll have negative, you'll have angry, you'll have peaceful. There's always both sides. It's the universal law of duality. And each person will have their pendulum swung to one of those sides. So some people will see things more positively, whereas other people will see things more negatively. Some people will come across as being more angry in different circumstances and more peaceful in different circumstances. So that pendulum for an individual is constantly swinging. Now, if the pendulum swings too far, it means that you're completely out of equilibrium. And therefore, that's where you'll see some people being described as being a narcissist on one side versus somebody being hugely altruistic on the other side. So that's how the pendulum can represent, literally on a micro level and on a macro level, everything that happens in the world, in nature, in ourselves. So if you take countries, politics, you take everything that's happened over the last number of years as regards different movements that have taken place from a political point of view, but also from a societal point of view. On a macro level, you can literally see the pendulum in operation on a macro level. On a micro level, meaning an individual within the overall world, you can actually see that pendulum operate every single moment of the time. So that's why I use the metaphor in relation to a pendulum. What you then will see underneath the pendulum is the arc that's created of the pendulum. Now, as a pendulum swings, it will create an arc on one side, but true physics will tell you that if it creates an arc on one side, the equal and opposite arc has to be created on the other side. So therefore, a person can swing from one side to the other side, just as well as on a macro level, things will swing to one side and to the other side. The arc that's created on one side will be created on the other side, unless you know how to work with the pendulum. And that's what I teach my clients. Because if you want to go from one side to the other side, you want to maintain being in equilibrium, which is the straight point. You don't want to go to the other side. So let me explain it for people. People will understand that in terms of, let's just say money, because that's something that people always want to bring up. In terms of, if you understand there's a universal law of rhythm, the pendulum follows the universal law of rhythm. So people will go from having a lot of money to having no money or less than money, meaning they've got a lot of debt. That rhythm is a universal law. But when you know how to not control the pendulum, but how you work with the pendulum, now you don't have to go and create the arc on the other side of what you've just experienced. The pendulum also represents contrast. If you don't understand, we're here to experience, is one of the things I've said in one of the previous episodes, we're here to experience life to its fullest. How we experience is through contrast. On both sides of the pendulum are both sides of contrast. On one side, you got heat. On the other side, you got cold. You cannot know cold without first knowing heat. You don't know it, because you have to have known one side. So you're here to experience. So when you talk about the pendulum, or when I'm describing the pendulum, there's so much, so much contained in just that simple little diagram that I could literally go on for months to try and explain it. But it's what I use for people when I work with clients, to understand. Literally, it's just that simple little thing. But once you have it in your mind of, okay, I need to get into equilibrium, and there's a whole lot of things in order to actually bring into equilibrium, but that's what you want to maintain. And then that's how you become one with your executive center, your unconscious, and your superconscious. That's oneness. And that's what we all want to achieve in this particular lifetime. So that's the pendulum for you.
When you talk about equilibrium, the most obvious example that comes into my mind is flying. Like when you have, the lift force equals the weight force and thrust equals the drag, and the force is in equilibrium, everything's in balance, and you're flying straight and level. Everything is, perfect.
And
Which is
it's effortless.
yeah, exactly. And you're in the flow, and um there's not much to do really, because everything is already set up. And when you talk about creating the opposite side of the arc, what did you mean there?
So let me put it this way, you can go from the two opposites. Okay, the two opposites will be hot and cold. If you let me just take an example of let me take it on the macro level. You can get a point whereby, and you'll observe this if you go back over the decades, you will have seen the world as being from a macro level, moves quite slowly on a macro level. You will see the world as being highly masculine. True?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's happening right now at the moment? There's a surge of the feminine energy coming through. That's the opposite to the masculine. So that pendulum right now at the moment is gone past and is moving towards to bring more feminine. Once it goes, so if you look at the pendulum conceptually in your mind, what you see is on one side is being highly masculine on a macro level in the world. The pendulum has swung all the way towards past equilibrium to being highly more feminine, and it's got more to go. And then it will come back into equilibrium. So when I say it needs to go from one side to the other side, you can take anything and it needs to go from one side to the other side. It needs to create that arc on the other side before it comes back into equilibrium. So but there are ways of working with it, if that makes sense.
Is this in any way related to karma, especially on, a macro level?
Not necessarily.
You say it.
On a macro level, you see from the perspective of you see boom and bust. You'll see recessions. You'll see great. In Ireland here we had the Celtic Tiger, and then we went straight into recession. That's the pendulum. So you can apply, when you start to look at it, you'll be able to apply the pendulum pretty much to everything.
So it's just a cyclical nature of things, right?
Exactly.
Things will go up and down.
Yeah, but here's the thing: when people don't understand the rhythm and they don't understand how to work with it, they get very despondent and depressed and anxious and fearful, because now they see, okay, we're moving into a different cycle. They're not aware of the pendulum actually happening, and therefore they move into they're moving from, let's say, a feast cycle into a famine cycle. Their money is being depleted, their expenses are going up, and all the kinds of things. And then they realize, now they get very, very fearful and anxious from all their emotions start to come up from that point of view. And then what actually happens is they exasperate everything in their life from that perspective, and then they get stuck on that side. In order to bring yourself back into equilibrium, you've got to look at, okay, so what's good that's happening in your life? And that's where people will talk with gratitude. People will talk about, I don't believe in positive thinking. Positive thinking is a one-sided view. You have to have both sides. So it's not about just being on cloud nine all the time. That doesn't exist. It's knowing that there's always both sides in every single moment of time. And it's embracing both sides. When you embrace both sides, now you've got objectivity. When you've got objectivity, now your pendulum is in equilibrium. If you look at it from the perspective of, you may have come across the term, Nicole, or you may not, but a lot of our listeners will be, what you resist persists. So think of it from the perspective of whatever you don't want to have in your life, the more you resist it, the more it's actually going to show up in your life. That's the pendulum being out of equilibrium. Because you're trying to push something out of your life, you're resisting it, but it's going to stay there, because literally it's feedback mechanism for yourself to know that you're out of equilibrium. Equally on the other, so that's one side of the pendulum. On the other side of the pendulum, what you desire is repelled. So if you're attached too much because you're desiring it too much, it will never come into your life, because the pendulum is swung too far, because you're desiring it too much. You're out of equilibrium. So therefore you're going to repel it. So when you know how to work with the pendulum, which is again what I teach my clients through, and what I bring people through in the executive lounge and the pilots lounge, I teach them how to work with the pendulum and how you maintain equilibrium. And when you maintain equilibrium, that's the flow state that we discussed earlier on. The pendulum is just so powerful, and the more, honestly, the more you look at it, the more complex you'll actually see it.
So on a micro individual level, the best way to find out how to deal with the pendulum being out of balance and out of equilibrium, would it be to work one-on-one with you? Because everyone's problems are going to be different. Everyone's pendulum and balance is different. So it would have to be a personalized
not necessarily. Yeah. You're right to an extent, but not necessarily, in the sense of a lot of problems, and let's just not call them problems, but a lot of things that people would have in their life that they would like to improve in their life are common across everybody. So they want to have more money. They want to have less response to emotions. They want to succeed more. They want to get more acknowledgement, more recognition. They want to make a difference. All of these are commonality across pretty much the vast majority of people. So there are things that we can do on a group basis, but equally there's some people that do. So for some of the executives and the business owners, they only want to work with me on a one-to-one basis. And the reason being is because of the position that they hold in their career, their life, their business. They don't want to be part of a group, and that's okay. So that's where I work with them on a one-to-one basis. But in a group format, no, it's what I'm bringing people through within the executive lounge and the pilot lounge in order to bring them back into an equilibrium state. And think of an equilibrium state from the perspective of that you go through life, that you don't have those swings. So that pendulum is not going left and right the whole time. You're actually more measured or more controlled. You're in equilibrium, and therefore when you're in equilibrium, then you're more in flow.
And how can someone, for example, a podcast listener, hearing this now, how can they start to recognize when their genius pendulum is out of balance or starting to become out of balance? Are there indicators that we should be recognizing and looking out for?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. Anytime that you feel restless, anytime that you feel lost, anything that you feel depressed, any kind of emotion that you perceive as being negative, meaning that you're anxious, you're fearful, any perceived negative emotion, that is all feedback to say that you're not in equilibrium. True equilibrium is when you're in a state of love. A true state of love is where you see both sides. That's when you're in equilibrium. So anything that's not love, so anger, hate, fear, anxiety, anything that's not love is now an indication, it's a feedback for yourself that you're actually out of equilibrium. That's the easiest way. And that is probably 99.9% of the population.
So everyone needs to work with you, Paul.
I wish. But let me put it this way. This is about how do you live life, in the real world. I remember I recorded on, I think it was episode 1, 2, or 3. I don't remember which one it was. But I said, look, there's a lot of people out there that you could be, for example, a monk and sit on top of the mountain, and you don't have any kids, you don't have a spouse, you don't have a partner, and you're there on your own. And yes, you can do all the practices that everybody teaches in terms of do your meditation, do your journaling, do your fitness routine, all kinds of things. But real life has to happen. So a lot of the clients that I work with, it's in the real life, meaning they have kids running around the house. They have a partner, they have a spouse, they have a business that they're trying to grow, or they have a career, they have a passion that they're trying to find. They're trying to find what it is that they're going to bring meaning and joy to their life. That's real life. So all the things that I bring my clients through is literally trying to deal with real life, as in the stuff that actually happens to us all every single day, all those challenges. How do we deal with all of that kind of stuff without being sitting on a cloud in the sky and in a meditation pose? Because that doesn't work. That's not real life.
That's really helpful. And I hope everyone is able to view the image of the pendulum themselves. I think what might be helpful would also be to kind of label the image, because on the graphical representation, it looks like any other pendulum, but when you explain it, it's so much more, and it's super helpful.
But that's the reason why. Curiosity killed the cat. I'm only joking. Listen, guys, the link is going to be in the show notes, and I'm going to take on what Nicole said in terms of I'm going to label that pendulum GIF, and you'll see it in operation. So the best way thing is to click on the link that's in the show notes, and you'll see it. You'll see what, and it will help from a visual perspective. And if you don't understand it fully, it's replay this episode until such time you actually see it in operation and observe on a macro level and on a micro level for yourself in relation to that pendulum and how it actually works and how it shows up in your life every single moment of the time. If you want to learn more and you want more help, you want more guidance in how to work with the pendulum and be in a state of flow, by all means, come join us in our community. Just head over to our website. Again, all the links are in the show notes. Just head over to paulwilliamdavis.com, and the links to the community will be on our website itself. And come join us in our community. It is free. My whole purpose is I'm trying to reach as many people as I possibly can. Hence the reason why it's open to people that are passionate about this kind of subject matter that we're talking about, want to get answers. I mean, real proper answers that's going to help them from their life perspective. And if you want to learn more about the Executive Lounge, the Pilots Lounge, you'll find all that information in the actual community itself. And another free resource is our weekly mastermind meeting. Again, I'll answer questions on personal mastery as well as business mastery within the actual mastermind meeting itself. Every single Monday, 2:00 Irish time. Come join us there. You'd be more than welcome. But until next time, I wish you every success.